Ladies and gentlemen, now we have come to the time for keynote speech session 2. In this session two, the keynote speaker is going to be Her Excellency Olivia Leslie. She is the ambassador of Ireland to Indonesia, and she is going to share about perspective from an Atlantic nation, climate change, mitigation, and Industry 4.0 in Ireland. In this keynote speech session 2, the dialogue session will be led by Dr. Ella S. Prihatini. Without further ado, I give the floor to Her Excellency Olivia Leslie and Dr. Prihatini to be the moderator.
Good morning, Safira. Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
Okay, shall I start? Are you happy for me to start, Dr. Safira?
Yeah, sure.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here this morning. Thanks to Binus University and also to the Archipelagic Island States Forum, at whose invitation I am also here today. And I also want to give my thanks as well to Professor Nantha Kumar as well for that fascinating look into the Belt and Road Initiative. I suppose in Ireland and in the European Union, we're fascinated in this. And I think the relationship between China and ASEAN is one of the key elements of what we call this century, the Asian century, as you probably know. And this is a really fascinating element for us. And I found it very interesting from my perspective. And Ireland's an EU member state, and you know, we have a very developed trading relationship with ASEAN and with China, and the evolution of the Belt and Road Initiative, including its extension into Europe, is just one element of what I think will be something very interesting and key for the next sort of 15, 20 years. How does the world's relationship with China evolve? So thank you so much to the professor for that discussion, and very interesting to see the questions as well about how it is that people in Indonesia perceive this. So as I said, delighted to be here today. Very happy as well to take part in a virtual forum. This is quite a challenging time for everybody, but I think we can see one upside in that we can have participants from all over, not just here in Indonesia, but from outside Indonesia as well, with relative ease. And I hope that that's something that we can all absorb, a lesson that we can absorb from this crisis, that we can have these types of events virtually. And we're talking about climate change today, and I think there is one also silver lining that we can consider, that sometimes if we don't all travel to events, we are doing one small little bit to improve climate issues. So onto our subject today, which is climate change mitigation and how that links to Industry 4.0 in Ireland. I'm pleased to be able to speak to you about our experience and how our industries are evolving to meet, I suppose, the new challenges of climate change. Before I start, I wanted to just very briefly mention a little bit about Ireland. I've been here in Indonesia for nearly 2 years now. And one thing I know from here, and also from my colleagues who work across the ASEAN member states, is that there is probably quite limited understanding of Ireland. I think most people online here will probably know a little bit about Ireland. All of you will know something about our largest neighbour, which is the United Kingdom. I'm just going to pop on a couple of slides for my presentation today. Let me see. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. But I wanted particularly to talk to you very briefly about Ireland. here we are, an island nation. We're just on the west coast of Europe. And the reason I wanted to introduce very quickly is, as I said, there's not an awful lot of knowledge about Ireland here. So we are an independent country. We are from the same generation of independent countries as Indonesia. We're a little bit older than you. We gained our independence from the United Kingdom in 1922. So next year and the year after are big celebration years for us as we celebrate our centenary of independence. We are an EU member state, a member of the European Union since the 1970s. We joined at the same time as Denmark and the United Kingdom. Some of you will be aware that the United Kingdom is leaving the EU shortly. We are a agricultural nation in some ways, but we are also a service-oriented, globalized economy. I mean, a couple of stats to maybe help you picture who we are. Sort of GNI per capita is about $60,000. Average salary is about $48,000 per year. We are 5 million people, very small. Is that even the population of Bekasi, I wonder? So we're a small country. We have, in terms of our economy, we have a lot of multinationals based in Ireland. So the European headquarters of a lot of tech companies, so the European headquarters of Twitter, Facebook, Apple, are all in Ireland. We have a particular economic environment which supports tech companies. A large number of pharma companies are also based in Ireland as well. When I was looking at some information to try and describe Ireland and always when I'm trying to describe Ireland to people, I look at various different types of information, and the one that popped into my head this time was how much, given that we're in the middle of a pandemic, how much do we spend on healthcare per head of population? And it's about $5,000 per head of population. That figure is similar to Singapore's, and I think the nearest comparator in ASEAN is Singapore, as I said, but Malaysia, etc., they're all around 1,000. So we have to spend a lot of money on healthcare in Ireland. We have an aging population, quite different, for example, to Indonesia. So that's just a little snapshot of my country. I would be interested to know if there was new information for people there. So today, I think I'm going to talk about climate change mitigation. And I wanted to just give you a sort of an impression of how Ireland is impacted by climate change. So as I said, we're a small Atlantic nation. There's nothing between us and the United States, just the big open Atlantic Ocean. We're a temperate climate for now, pending changes in the climate. Obviously, it's never very hot, and it's also never very cold. It doesn't snow very much, for example, or if ever. And our seas are warmed by the Gulf Stream, which comes up the side of Ireland from Mexico. And as I said, we have a modern digital economy. But I suppose, like many countries in Europe, we also have quite high carbon emissions. So there are 7.1 million tons of carbon emitted per head of population in Ireland. If you compare that, let's say, with one of the better students in Europe, let's say Denmark, they have 5.5 tons per head of capita. And in Indonesia, you have 1.9 tons per head of capita. So I think that demonstrates a little bit the challenges that Ireland faces in climate change mitigation. And then in terms of the impacts of climate change, some of the issues which will arise for us are sea level rise, more intense storm and rainfall events, increased likelihood and magnitude of river and coastal flooding. And flooding is quite a large issue in Ireland at the moment, as I know it is here in Indonesia. I know that you also have had a particularly bad year this year for flooding. We will experience water shortages in summer. We're a Northern Hemisphere country, so we have 4 distinct seasons, quite different to equatorial ASEAN countries who have more like 2 seasons. we would expect adverse impacts on water quality. So if there's a shortage of water, there's also issues relating to water quality. Changes in distribution of plant and animal species, extremely important. You know, how does that distribution impact on agriculture, for example? Damage to fisheries, as you can see, we're an island, so we catch a lot of fish. That's what we do. Very much like Indonesia, it's a big part of our economy. Decrease in food security. This is quite an interesting one for Ireland. Ireland is the most food secure country in the world. We make 40 times more food than we need to consume, and have always. It's a key issue relating to our economy as well. And any change on that will not only have an impact on domestic issues, but also on will also have an impact on our ability to export, for example. And then air quality deterioration. We have pretty good air quality in Ireland currently. It is something that I have been depressed, I suppose, to see deteriorate in recent years, but illnesses arising from air quality deterioration are growing in Ireland, just as they're growing across Southeast Asia. So I don't think we should underestimate the impact on health of climate change, particularly in developed countries like Ireland and developed economies like Indonesia's as well. So, I mean, I suppose what I would say here is that these all sound quite familiar to you, the same types of risks that Indonesia faces. And I think critically as well, the same types of risks faced by other small island nations in the Pacific, Caribbean and elsewhere. And in Southeast Asia, I think as the years progress, you will have more engagement with countries in the Pacific particularly. And I know that the Archipelagic Island States Forum, of which Ireland is a member, is seeking to bring together those kind of small island developing states, not just from the Pacific, but elsewhere, and larger archipelagos like Indonesia, like Japan, for example, to help talk and share about climate change mitigation. So
apologies for the interruption, Her Excellency, but I think we haven't moved from our first slide there. Sorry about that.
You have, sorry, what?
We can't see your second or your third slide. So this is still in the first title page.
Oh, is it? Oh dear. Okay.
Yeah. It's okay.
And where is it now? Is it still in the first title page?
Page 1, yes, still page 1.
Oh dear. Okay, I'm moving through my slides now. I'll be very honest with you. The slides are not the most important part. So let me see. Let me see if I can get us on to a different slide now. Okay.
Yeah, that would be excellent. Thank you so much.
Sorry, we're no problem. Let me see. Okay, I'm going to put us on the next. Let's see. Now. It's a little bit of time before we get to the discussion on this slide, but let's hang on there. Okay, is that better, Dr. Ella?
Yes, excellent.
Great. Okay.
You can make it a full page if that's possible.
Okay, hang on.
That one.
It changed again. Oh dear. Okay.
Okay, we can just skip it this way.
Yeah, we'll skip it. Hang on, I've just got to go back to the meeting.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. I will stop sharing. I promise there isn't too much in the slides. They were just merely to help me, I suppose, move through the presentation. So I wanted to say very quickly as well is that I'm, as per the introduction, I'm Ireland's ambassador in Indonesia, and I'm also the ambassador to the ASEAN organization, which, as you know, is based here in Jakarta. And as such, I'm a public servant, so I'm not an academic or a researcher. So you'll have to forgive me if I focus a little bit today on the state's response to climate change, which certainly in my country we agree is the biggest challenge facing this generation and will be the biggest challenge for generations to come. And often we find that innovation comes from academics and researchers and comes from the private sector. But in Ireland, we are strongly of the belief that innovation in climate change really has to be led by the state, that we have an obligation to innovate and to challenge, and also to provide the space for our industries to do the same. So my perspective today is very much from the state. I think you would find that climate researchers in Ireland or people working in industry might have quite a different approach. So today I want to take you through 4 areas where Ireland is making progress on climate change mitigation. Some good progress, other progress may be less impressive. We look first at the national and European framework for climate action. And this is also linked to Ireland's Overseas Development Cooperation Programme and our role in the United Nations. I will then discuss how Ireland's policy for industry, including Industry 4.0, which I know is up for discussion today, supports a green agenda. And finally, I will talk to you about some examples of best practice in Irish business, including in digitalization. As I mentioned earlier, Ireland is a proud member of the European Union, and it's our membership of the world's most integrated regional body has brought us stability and prosperity. And it is, I suppose, importantly also helped us frame our climate commitments and frame our ambitions as signatories to the Paris Agreement, which, as you all know, is currently under threat, but also, you know, really a cornerstone of the international community's response to you know, the severe threat of climate disruption. The European Union aims to be carbon neutral by 2050. It's ambitious, but it's an ambition that Ireland also shares. And together with our EU partners, we've set milestones on the road to 2050, particularly in reducing carbon emissions. And to that end, the Irish government has both a climate action plan, and I had a slide about that, but I'm going to take you through it anyway, and also a climate mitigation plan. And interestingly, in the next couple of weeks, we will have a new government in Ireland. We had an election some time ago. Gosh, we had an election a long time ago. At this stage, it feels like a few months now, but we had an election, and we're currently in the process of forming a new government in Ireland. And I suppose whatever the makeup of that government, it will be a number of parties, not unlike you have here. The climate action plan will probably need to be reinforced to help us improve delivery on our targets. And some of the current targets, which we may need to increase if we're going to reach our 2030 ambitions and then on to 2050. So the European Union had ambitions at 2020, 2030, and then again at 2050. So some of our targets, which will help us keep up with our European partners, keep in step with them, include ensuring that 70% of our energy comes from renewable resources, which will allow us to phase out the use of coal and peat. And here in Indonesia, you'll be very familiar with the use of both coal and peat. We want to retrofit 500,000 homes to ensure energy efficiency. And this is a key issue in Ireland, where household efficiency is very poor. As I said, Ireland can be, you know, it's not too hot, not too cold, but, you know, we need to use heating for 6 to 7 months of the year. So we need to make our homes more efficient. We will also be increasing the prevalence of electric cars on the road, and we have significant targets around agriculture. And, you know, we are, as I said, a farming nation. We export a lot of beef, a lot of dairy, and other agricultural products. And you will be aware that with those products, there does come a carbon cost. So developing greener agricultural policies is really critical to us. Finally, I would say that when we are developing all those activities, all our policies have to go through sort of rigorous climate proofing. So no matter what policy that you're coming up with in Irish government, whether it's on housing, on education, on child protection, any issue, it has to go through the filter of climate proofing. So none of those initiatives are particularly surprising to you, I imagine, and you're familiar with them here in Indonesia and across Southeast Asia. You know, we don't have diesel buses on the streets in Dublin anymore. And I know that the city of Jakarta is phasing out petrol buses, for example, and Indonesia and other Southeast Asian countries are undertaking quite a lot of reforestation, as we are in Ireland. And of course, here in Indonesia, you're doing it on a very large scale. And I know as well, of course, from my own engagement here, that you are taking on the challenge of developing climate-friendly agricultural policies, which are, you know, some of the most challenging, particularly in countries where there is a heavy reliance, like Ireland, like Indonesia, on agriculture to provide basic income for citizens. I wanted to mention as well that alongside those initiatives, you know, in Ireland, we've really recognized that you can't move forward without consensus, without what we call the social compact. So, you know, the social compact is what allows democracies to thrive. We all have to be in it together. And, you know, we recognize that our economic prosperity has come at a cost to our emissions. So we know we have to take collective action and that everyone has to be bought into the climate process. That's probably easier in a country of 4.9 million people than it is in an archipelago that's like Indonesia of 265 million, but it's absolutely key. So we have a national climate dialogue that's hugely important. We also have a thing called a Just Transition Review Group, which engages with people who fear for their livelihoods. And that's really key to keeping us on the road as well. So if you think your job is threatened by climate action, then you have the capacity and the capability to engage with the government and express those fears and be compensated for that. And the most recent one in Ireland will support transitions in the peat industry. And obviously you have a lot of peat here in parts of Kalimantan and Sumatra as well. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the external issues now as well. That's, I suppose, an overview of what we do at government level to frame our climate response. Although Ireland is a small island nation, we see ourselves as global citizens. We're the most globalized economy in the world, ourselves and the Dutch. There are more Irish people outside Ireland than inside Ireland. So, you know, our trade is really global, etc. So we feel, you know, with that type of engagement, there's a responsibility to support partner countries respond to climate disruption. And one way that we do that is through our development assistance program. So we have a long and well-regarded development cooperation program. It's called Irish Aid. It's part of my ministry, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And since its establishment 30, 40 years ago, Irish Aid, I suppose, has always sought to help the furthest behind first. So for many years, we've worked with partner countries in Africa, in the Middle East, in parts of Asia, in more disadvantaged parts of Asia, to deliver programs which focus on eradicating hunger, poverty, and disease. And in recent years, as the threat of climate change has become ever more apparent, our cooperation program has evolved to target the impacts of climate change on the most vulnerable communities on our planet, predominantly in Africa, I have to say. That's where our engagement has been. And, you know, we understand that it will be those marginalized communities who suffer most from climate change, particularly in countries with a high reliance on agriculture and on fisheries. And I mean, I think we all know that we are already seeing the impacts of climate change on parts of Africa with, you know, much more significant migration happening due to increased flooding, drought, etc. So it's we are now at the point where we need to respond to that climate change. So our activities, Irish Aid's activities in our partner countries include funding to support adaptation programs, climate adaptation programs, including safe and sustainable access to water, and the development of climate resilient food systems. As I said, Ireland is one of the most food secure country in the world. That means we know how to build a food system. And so we have been sharing that expertise with our partners for many years now. We don't have a development cooperation program here in Indonesia. This is a much more developed economy than our usual partners. This is as the previous speaker said, this is a country with a huge GDP. You don't necessarily need outside support. But we have, in recent years, for example, supported the development of a sustainable fisheries cooperative owned and managed by a female collective in Kalimantan. And that program is delivered through a local organization called Yayasan Tambuhak Sinta. And it's designed to support climate-friendly economic activity in a region where heavy agriculture, particularly extractive palm oil, dominates the landscape. And we believe that supporting sustainable industries like that fisheries one will provide alternative and reliable incomes for communities should their access to palm become restricted in any way. So in tandem with the integration of climate action into our development cooperation program, which I just mentioned, Ireland has also developed a standalone policy for our engagement with the SIDS, the Small Island Developing States. As you know, I mentioned earlier Ireland's membership of the Archipelagic Island States Forum, which includes many of those countries. So our SIDS strategy is founded on the solidarity that we've had with them for many years. So we have a long legacy of collaboration on issues such as nuclear non-proliferation, climate justice, and gender. And it also, the strategy also includes a shared commitment to ensuring the voices of small nations are heard at the United Nations, and a commitment to multilateralism and a rules-based international order. So through the strategy, we look to engage and support our island partners across 4 pillars. Those are gender equality, reducing humanitarian need, governance, and finally, of course, climate action. And on climate action, Ireland has committed funding and support to, for example, the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, which kicks in following large-scale and devastating weather events in the Caribbean, for example. The World Bank Blue Economy Project, which is helping develop blue economies, and this one will be the one we're supporting is in the Caribbean, and the Asian Development Bank's SIDS Trust Fund. And we've also established a fellowship to assist academics from the small island developing states complete research on key issues relating to climate change. So along with those practical programs, Ireland has also committed to amplifying the voice of the SIDS in key international fora and at the EU so that their needs and ambitions are understood. I mean, I think it's important to recognize that some of those small states are facing truly devastating consequences of climate disruption. Last week, Ireland won election to the United Nations Security Council for a 2-year period starting in 2021. Indonesia actually is currently on the Security Council and will finish at the end of this year. And so as part of our campaign to be elected to that, to the Council, we committed to ensuring that the voices of small island countries, such as our own, are heard at the highest level. And climate change, you know, it impacts everyone. It is intrinsically linked to global security and stability. And I mentioned migration earlier, and the risks that people take in migration, and the numbers of lives lost through migration. And you know, a lot of that stems from the insecurity and instability that comes from climate disruption. So you know, we're really proud that the small island states in particular, and other countries obviously, trusted us enough to give us their vote to represent them on the Security Council. And I hope that we will be able in international fora to I suppose, to represent the needs of small countries and large countries like Indonesia on climate when we're on the council. So very quickly back to Ireland and the second part of our discussion today. As I mentioned earlier, all our government policies undergo rigorous climate proofing. This includes all our policies around economic promotion and industrial development. So all the agencies that we have working for the government who are tasked with supporting Irish industry and businesses grow have a strong mandate to ensure that companies seeking to grow in a way which supports the government's climate change ambitions. So, you don't get funding to support the development of your company if you cannot demonstrate a commitment to climate change targets. So the policy framework which we have is something called, we have Project Ireland 4040, which is the vision for Ireland, 2040, which is the vision for Ireland to 2040. Under that we have Future Jobs Ireland, which is the cornerstone document for preparing Ireland for the new realities of employment, which I'm sure you'll be discussing in other sessions. And one of the 5 pillars of Future Jobs is transitioning to a low carbon economy. So under Future Jobs, we also have a new 5-year strategy, which was released last year, called Ireland's Industry 4.0, to support the digital transformation of the manufacturing industry and its supply chain. And so at the heart of this is our understanding that process innovation, so innovation around how we get from A to Z in manufacturing, in technology, in pharma, etc., that process innovation built on digital technologies can lead to more efficient and flexible production processes with increased resource efficiency. And in short, resource efficiency means less carbon emissions. So under this plan, the government commits to support our industries to access the best peer learning and research and development opportunities. It also commits to ensuring wide access to something called the Disruptive Technologies Innovation Fund. And that fund, which was one of the first of its kind in the world, and has about 500 million euros of funding, it has supported many different types of digitization projects, including those which aim to deliver more climate-friendly solutions in manufacturing. So, for example, the fund has supported the development of a zero emissions heat pump, water treatment, etc. And then outside the climate area, it has supported the developments of more digitized diagnostics, in medicine, more efficient dialysis for kidney patients, 3D printing, etc. So that is how we fund the Irish government funds innovation in that area. And we are also committed to ensuring that our businesses, big and small, can access the EU's Digital Europe Fund, which some of you may have heard of. And it's the European Union's mechanism for ensuring that we have competitive advantage in Industry 4.0. And I think that's important. We all know that we have to keep up on digitization, and I think it's a fairly level playing field. So it's important for all regions to really invest in this particular area. It's as important for the EU as it is for ASEAN. So I believe that Ireland's innovation ecosystem, developed over many years as a collaboration between business, research and government, will give us a particular advantage as we confront new realities around digitization, robotics, artificial intelligence, etc. So during the 1980s and 1990s, many large tech firms, I mentioned some of them earlier, but we also have Intel, we have Dell, etc. They came to Ireland because we had a well-educated workforce, and they stayed. And that inward investment continues to this day. Numerous tech companies open every year. And it's greatly supported by our ongoing expertise in research, including in areas like nanotechnology, where Ireland ranks second in the world. So we have worked really hard to create an ecosystem where companies can, have access to a great workforce, have access to really good research and innovation, and have, in place government and financing for research systems which support them to grow their own businesses. So to finish up, I wanted to talk about a couple of examples of how Ireland is supporting climate action through technologies. And I decided, given that it's one of our strengths, that I would focus on agriculture and innovation in agriculture. And where better to start, I suppose, than a company that has two facilities, soon to be 3, here in Indonesia, the ᴇᴜ Group. And the ᴇᴜ Group is a food group. And it started as a small dairy cooperative, 10 kilometers from the town where I was born, in Kerry in Ireland, it's called. And it was a pretty small company when it started. And it's now one of the world's largest food and ingredient conglomerates, with revenue of about 7 billion euros every year. And it has plants and facilities all over the world, in Brazil, etc. But it also has quite a few here in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia, in the Philippines, in Thailand, etc. And in 2019 alone, it invested nearly 300 million euros in research and innovation. And the legacy of that kind of investment, so investing back into your company, into technological processes, has really served it over the years. And you know, I had on one of my slides, I had a quick description of what they have achieved. But I think, you know, the most important one is that in the past 5 years, they have achieved, through their innovation, through improving their processes, through technologies, a 23% reduction in emissions at a time when their business was growing. And that essentially is an example of a company that really has worked very hard to improve its capacity to innovate. And that type of precision agriculture is definitely growing in Ireland. And I was going to mention three other Irish companies and what they've done. And I think it's fascinating to explore this area and to see the practical implication of digitization. So there's a company called Keynote in Ireland, and it was one of the first Irish agri-business companies to be accredited by the Carbon Trust. And what it has done is it's developed a diet and feeder machinery. So machinery that automatically feeds cows and animals, other animals, pigs, etc. And this machinery uses data harvested from individual farms to ensure that the correct amount of feed is distributed to animals, thereby leading to less waste, less carbon. And that machinery is sold all over the world now, in the US, in Germany, in Denmark, etc., in countries where agriculture has particularly become more digitized. Another one I wanted to mention was the APIS Protect project, which is quite different, and it has developed sensor technology to manage beehives and support the protection of bee populations across Europe. So from a small area in Cork, with a small set of digital equipment, they monitor the health and well-being of millions and millions of bees across Europe. And you know, we have a bee crisis in the Northern Hemisphere. So the protection of bees is absolutely key to us to maintaining our ecosystems. And this project, which received government funding, is now responsible for the welfare of bees across Europe. And then finally, I wanted to mention a company called Dairy Master, which is also from Kerry, from my home region. And they developed something called the Moo Monitor. And the Moo Monitor is a data collection device that cows wear around their necks. And this provides information in a non-intrusive way to individual farmers and to the dairy cooperatives about, you know, efficiency, about how to improve efficiency and animal welfare. And so, as I said, in fact, the last 3 projects I mentioned were all supported by government funding to one extent or another. And I think that is the most practical example I can give you of how much Ireland, how much the state recognizes and how much private enterprise recognizes that the digitization of our economy will only be successful if it helps us to achieve our ambitious climate action goals, and that we can only design policies and frame our supports in the context of climate action. And that is where Industry 4.0 will come into its strength. It will deliver for us improvements on climate action. Thank you for listening to Ireland's story today, and I hope it's given you an insight into our ambitions. So thanks very much, and back to you, Dr. Saphir.
Thank you very, very much, Her Excellency, for the presentation that we learned so much from Ireland. And my apologies for not delivering the introduction of your portfolio before your presentation because I was muted. So just to give a background of Ambassador of Ireland to Indonesia, I quoted you from various platforms. You were saying that last year, Indonesia and Ireland celebrating our 35 years of diplomatic relations. Even though that we only had the embassy here in Jakarta in the last 5 years or so. And also Ambassador Olivia Leslie is a career diplomat. So her whole life has been a career diplomat. So she's very excellent in terms of selling Ireland to every country in the world. And you've been working for the government since 2003, and your first post was in Cairo, am I correct?
Yes.
And then having various activities as well to develop the Irish global strategy and the impact by 2025. So reading your portfolio, I hope that our audience will also understand the background, as you also already mentioned that you have a very strong background in diplomatic career. So some questions have been raised by our audience here. I'd like to pick a couple, and I'm hoping that we can generate a fruitful discussion. So first question is regarding to our collaboration, Indonesia and Ireland, for renewable energy. Is there such cooperation or, maybe G2G or business to business cooperation when it comes to renewable energy? As we know that our agricultural sector is far from being efficient in terms of carbon production. So how are we sitting now at the moment in terms of renewable energy cooperation?
Thank you, and thank you very much for the kind introduction as well. I can't pretend to be an expert on climate change, but as you say, I have a long career working government to government. So this is a question which I will be able to answer without having to use too much technical detail. So presently we don't have an environment program with the Indonesian government. We don't have environment cooperation. But as I said, Ireland is a EU member state and we're a net contributor to the European Union. So we, along with our member states, we finance the activities of the European Union. And the EU has a fairly developed environmental protection program with Indonesia and good government-to-government discussions around it, etc. One area which I think is, is important is that we very keen to maintain a dialogue with Indonesia because, you are the lungs of Southeast Asia. This is a huge country. And your very impressive work around reforestation and continuing work around sustainability of fisheries, for example, has very good lessons for us. In terms of Ireland, one of the things I've been working on in the last couple of years is trying to ensure that I connect innovators in Ireland with the people who need that information here. So with agricultural companies here, which are much larger than those in Ireland. But yes, we have been working to ensure that some of the interesting technology that we have been developing is being made available to Indonesian agricultural companies. Sorry, excuse me.
Thank you so much for that. And the second question is the curiosity that our audience has in regards to carbon trading tax. So, or is there any strict tax when it comes to greenhouse tax to reduce the climate issues? Because we know for some years that our neighboring country, Australia, also have this strong debate when it comes to greenhouse tax. So what was the strategy for Ireland to have this disincentive for people who are having high carbon, making their carbon production lesser in a year when it comes to tax. So to incentivize people from a tax perspective. Is there such approach in Ireland?
Yeah, well, I mean, what I would say is that there is such an approach, and in terms of incentives, we don't need too many incentives, because as European Union member states, we will face very significant fines if we do not reach our targets and our goals. And I think, as anyone who's looked at climate issues in the EU will know, those will be pursued by the EU quite vigorously. So we have a large incentive as a government to make sure our industry complies with emissions targets. Now, as I said earlier, there is the issue of carbon tax. I mean, carbon tax exists in Ireland in a sense, but the issue of carbon tax is much more in the news these days, because we are hopefully having a new government in the next couple of weeks, and one of the possible formations of that government will include our Green Party, for example. But even if it doesn't include it, the question of environment is something which comes up now on the doorsteps. We say on the doorsteps for when people are campaigning, and one of the issues that's really being pushed is that we need to develop a more systematic way of having companies contribute where they cannot, or where they are unable to lower carbon emissions. But I think, as you saw from the example of the Kerry Group, most companies in Ireland and most profitable companies everywhere, see that there is a huge advantage in reducing emissions. So if I see that Kerry has reduced its emissions 23%, it's doing that across the world in countries that don't have carbon taxes. So, that's, I spoke earlier about the private sector driving innovation. Well, I think for the private sector, there's a huge incentive. The role of government is both, of course, to monitor and police carbon emissions, but also to provide companies with, the structural research funding support to get them to get them to that place. And I think we've been very successful in supporting companies to do that, and that has to remain part of government policy alongside any, and will remain part of it alongside any other carbon taxes, etc.
I think that is the key, isn't it, for the success of your Ireland, in terms of increasing the motivation from the private sector to reduce their emission, because they have that incentive in terms of help to get support when it comes to research and development, to be more efficient, effective, especially for the agricultural sector. But we have a question here from Ayunita Khairinisa. So she was asking about what are the best practices on dealing with climate change that can be easily implemented by other small developing island states. So I think the word developing is underlined. So what are the key solutions, or maybe potential solutions, for developing island states?
So, I mean, I think the first thing I would say is that Ireland knows that we've had some success, but we're also very conscious that we are not the best in class. And I think it's important to acknowledge that when we're talking about climate change. We faced our challenges too, and we haven't always delivered what we've wanted to do. And our government has been open about that, and I'm sure future governments will be as well. In terms of small island developing states, I think the value that we bring there is, in many ways, we have, huge coastal populations, etc., low-lying areas, floods, and so some of the, so at the macro level, obviously, there are companies that are developing products that will mitigate against climate change in the wider sense. So I mentioned the heat pump, for example, but we also have companies developing products to very specifically, take advantage of the resources that we have. For example, waves. So the government supports, through one of our universities, a facility where people can test new technologies to harness wave power. I don't know if any of you have ever spent a day in winter on the North Atlantic. The waves are big, they can produce a lot of electricity. So for example, you know, sharing those kind of technologies and sharing the approach to supporting companies to develop them is something that perhaps we could, wind and wave are two of the big resources that we have. But you know, we ourselves are getting information and getting support in our research from countries that are even more evolved on those, Denmark, Scotland, etc. So for small countries, we would have, I think, the research environment is important to share, and also things that we have in common. So we have, you know, these quite exposed coastal communities. I think one thing where we're very good as a country, and have learned it through not getting it right before, but we get it right now, is engaging communities. And one of the things we do with our small island developing states is we have meetings called Keynote, which are essentially where you bring everyone together to discuss, you know, key challenges and for example, to be able to talk about areas where we might innovate together. And I think that's one lesson that we can give. I spoke earlier about the Just Transition review groups, about community discussions on climate change. And I think those are an area where we can certainly share our expertise, and it's absolutely critical, because lots of people's livelihoods are going to be impacted by actions we have to take on climate, and we have to provide them with we have to first of all persuade them of the merits, and secondly provide them with alternative livelihoods.
Yes, excellent. I strongly agree with you that I think that one of the key advantage, aside from research, is also, you've mentioned before about the social compact. So the action, whatever policy that the government wish to achieve, they need to be done collectively. So everyone needs to be on board together. And then the transition needs to be prepared. Otherwise, people will be like, I'm losing my jobs, and what can I do? And then is a very excellent approach, quite extensive and thorough. That brings me to the question from our audience, Muhammad Hamsal. He's questioning your experience since you're being assigned to Jakarta in 2018. So far, what do you think the main challenges or issues being faced by Indonesian government when it comes to dealing with the global climate change? What is our biggest issues or challenges in Indonesia?
Okay, thank you very much for the question, Mohammed. I mean, one thing I would say is that, you know, the Indonesian government is extremely engaged on climate and environmental issues. You have a lot of expertise here, high levels of engagement in the community, but the government here is really very engaged and is to be commended for that. You know, we mentioned some of the issues earlier that Ireland faces, that Indonesia is also facing, flooding, for example. But one area where I think, you know, you really are going to have to, and where you are innovating, which is fantastic, is seasonal fires and haze from seasonal fires. And I have been, you know, struck since I've been here of the impact of seasonal fires on the health and well-being of people who live nearby, on children, etc. But also its impact on the political relationships in the region. It's quite striking. But I've also really, you know, been so impressed to see the Indonesian government's response on this. I saw the testing the other day of these, as I said, I apologize, I'm not an expert, these salt bombs that go, that create rain to stop, to prevent fire spreading. And that is, you know, that's a hugely impressive piece of innovation. And I suppose to deploy that in a country like Indonesia, which is absolutely enormous. I mean, I was looking, you know, Ireland is a little bit bigger, but not much bigger than Bali. So, you know, you can tell we're not dealing with the same scale. But I have been super impressed by innovation in those areas. I think, you know, the livelihoods question is a big one here, and you know, all the environmental challenges we have, they're all global. Everybody's in, you know, we're all in the same boat, but some of us are, you know, in a big oil tanker, super tanker, protected from the waves, and some of us are in small sailing boats, you know, really much more vulnerable. And it is a livelihoods issue, and you know, to me, it is really key to transformation here, because I think you have the technology, I think you have the willingness, I think you have the expertise in government as well as in your research institutions to make the transformations necessary. But I do think it'll be very challenging to ensure that piece which we were just talking about, the social compact, to provide jobs for industry 4.0, 5.0, etc., to work out, you know, what kind of economy you will have in an age of robotics and AI, etc., and how to support your vulnerable communities. So all the same problems that Ireland has, plus the very difficult issue of fires and the regional impact of that, I think, are some of the key issues.
Thank you so much for your answers and your explanation. Your presentation has been overwhelmingly important for our conference, and our gratitude for your participation. So this is a kind of appreciation for Her Excellency Ambassador of Ireland for Indonesia, Her Excellency Olivia Leslie. Thank you so much for the talks, and the Q&A session has been very, very important for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ella, much appreciated. And I hope that it has been of some interest. Thank you.
Yes,
It is in great interest. Thank you so much.
I would say thank you very much to Her Excellency Olivia Leslie for your really remarkable sharing and insights. And thank you very much to Dr. Ella Prihatini for being the moderator. I'm pretty sure that everybody is learning many new things today, right? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that the end of the keynote speech session means that we're finally at the end of this opening of the second day of ICOBAR 2020. We would like to thank our honorable guests, our honorable keynote speakers, of course, and all participants of the conference, as well as participants of keynote speech session. Bina Nusantara University would also like to thank AIS for sponsoring ICOBAR 2020.
In the year 2017, the Archipelagic and Island States Forum initiated. The Archipelagic and Island States Forum, or AIS Forum, is a designated platform to include 47 archipelagic and island nations focused in 4 thematic areas. Those are climate change mitigation and adaptation, blue economy, marine plastic debris, and good maritime governance. AIS Forum Secretariat has developed 3 programs that encourage innovations through research and development and entrepreneurship. Those are Joint Research Program, the Innovators Scholarship Program, and Innovation Challenge. We believe that the academicians play a big role in advancing R&D. Thus, we initiated the Joint Research Program between academic institutions to come up with breakthrough ideas that could bring benefit to AIS participating countries. In the second program, we will bring talented individuals through the Innovator Scholarship Program to come up with innovations that contribute to the economy of AIS countries. The scholarship program is a partnership between AIS Forum with universities from archipelagic and island countries. Last, in the light of COVID-19 pandemic, it is important for archipelagic and island states to have a resilient economy. Therefore, AIS Forum Secretariat introduces the Innovation Challenge, an idea competition to find business solutions that can help companies and societies at large withstand a crisis situation. Many solutions to challenges that affect AIS participating countries in 4 main thematic areas and SDG 14 goals are produced through collaboration programs. These programs will explore opportunities through innovation and experiment that benefits on a local, regional, and international scale through sharing knowledge and experiences between AIS participating countries.
So once again, thank you very much. I hope you all the best luck and see you next time. Have a good day.